So before we move into our sit, because we started the year exploring the teachings of the Buddha called the Eightfold Path, which is the fourth of the Four Noble Truths, and gives us some direction in how to take these teachings and really apply them in so many different ways, with some introspection, some wisdom, and definitely practice. So that in the way that I teach, I like it to be very applicable to everyday life. And you've probably noticed that we all have really different styles, which I think is fantastic. So I wanted to read a poem about being on a path. And this is written by one of my former students and mentees. She is a black psychotherapist in Chicago with 3 little girls, and she's an incredible poet. And I kept telling her, you have got to publish your poetry. And this I got in the mail in January. So this one actually doesn't have a title. And her name's Carla, and she says, I wish I could tell you that every path will be perfect, that you'll never stumble or fall down more than once. I wish I could always protect your comings and goings, that you wouldn't suffer. But life has its own set of rules, and pain is one of them. You may suffer less if you choose to apply wisdom and not make the same poor choices as those who came before you. This living, awakened lifestyle doesn't protect you from the world's harsh realities. You encounter all truths with a non-judgmental mind. In knowing, you will grow vibrantly and in some way manage to walk the path of peace. The eye of the storm, though it rages and swirls around you, yes, you, stay grounded in the center, unwavering, unchanged, present, a guiding hope of light for those who need it most. So, with that lovely description of being on a path, that very realistic description, let's really take our seats. So just check in with your posture. Yeah, so we are continuing on the Eightfold Path, getting sort of close to the end. How many of you have been here for one or more parts of this? Oh, yay, wonderful, great. So, when the Buddha had his experience of awakening after trying a lot of things and experiencing, frustration and discouragement and disappointment, and he determined that he was just going to have to find out how to live and relate to suffering on his own. And that's really where our sitting practice started. He just said, I'm going to sit under this tree until I figure it out, or it figures me out. And so his original teaching, as you know, was the Four Noble Truths: the fact of suffering, the cause of suffering, which is craving, and that the reality that there's a way to not suffer, there's a way to freedom. And the Fourth Noble Truth is what we're working on now. The Eightfold Path is how to live in such a way to achieve that freedom from suffering. Now every time I do this, I'll be self-conscious. And my partner Hugh and I were talking on the way down here about how the Eightfold Path, each component of the path informs the others and makes this many-stranded rope that is stronger than just a couple strands. And we started with wise view, because it's good to have a sense that you know where you're going, and that you are aware of your prejudices, your biases, that you have some thoughtfulness into just even questioning your perceptions, not just assuming that that's reality. That's a part of wise view. And it's just really important. It also means that we have viewed the Four Noble Truths for ourselves. That's like in the classical sense. And so that gets us started, and we've heard about wise intention. I spoke on that. Wise speech, wise action. Jokai talked on last week, and this week I'm going to be speaking about wise livelihood. When I first got the assignment, I was like, oh. I don't want to talk about that. And I don't know really what that's about. And I thought maybe it would be, a lot of people in the sangha are retired. Like, how can I make this come alive for myself first? And of course, as soon as always that I start reading about what I'm speaking about, I get totally engaged and really interested in it and find out how much there is going on there. So Jokai did a beautiful job of talking about wise action, and this will inform this talk as well, which is it's not just what we do for a living, but how we do it. What kind of heart quality do we hold? What kind of mind state are we in? Or do we just sort of check out, work's here, spiritual life's here, recreation's here, but what I love about the Buddhist teachings in particular is that they inform every area of our lives, and they're meant to. They're meant for us to live together in a way that is non-harming. And, as I was reading Carla's poem, I thought, wow, this is a poem for the times we're in right now, when it is so hard to see the path, let alone walk on it. And yet it's also the most vital time to do it. It's not the time to check out either, completely. And each one of us is finding our own balance, our own way. When I talk to friends, some are like, I don't do news at all. And I'm like, you think that's really a good idea? And then she said, well, actually, I do the headlines every day. Okay, cool. And there are others who just want to fume and vent about it all the time, but it's not really helping anything. It's escalating the fear in people around you. So it's a very challenging time, but it's also a time for us to do, as Carla said, find our way to walk the path of peace, our path. And then as a community, we have certain guidelines so that we can coexist peacefully together. So the Buddha laid out like 5 types of work you should not do, and I'll just tell you. The first one is don't trade in weapons or anything that can harm others. Don't trade in human beings, like human trafficking. Don't work in meat production or killing living animals. Don't manufacture and sell intoxicants and addictive substances, or producing any kind of poison. So that can also be poisoned ideas and poisoned speech, if you will, or not thoughtful anyway. And in our work, we should refrain from deceit. So don't lie to people at work. So those are, pretty extreme, and so we need to really look at the more subtle and integrated ways of how we can examine what wise livelihood is. And the first part is just to realize that it's impossible to separate meditative wisdom from having an ethical understanding. And so this section of the Eightfold Path is the ethical path: speech, action, livelihood, and I think there's one more. View. View's the wisdom factor, and then there are ethical factors, and then there's meditative factors. So actually it's interesting, isn't it, that we need to examine and develop these ethical qualities before we even get to the last two, which is concentration and mindfulness. You know, in some of our Western linear way, we might think that's where the path starts, meditation. But actually, I once heard Jack Kornfield say it's really hard to sit and meditate after a day of lying, cheating, and stealing. Unless you're like a sociopath who likes meditation. So I started to ask myself, like, what motivates us? What gets us out to do what we do as a livelihood and or in retirement? And I just wrote this list, and I could have gone on and on. The first thing that came up was passion or love for the work, our family's values or traditions, like everyone in my family works in the hardware store or is in law. You know, everyone before me was a doctor. History, like where we are in history, you know, especially as women or people of color or LGBTQI community, you know, how can we find ourselves in the context of history and do what is important to us? Money, of course, to, you know, support ourselves, and then responsibility to supporting others in our families. I know several of my students who support their parents. They're, you know, people who emigrated. Security, which is an illusion. Ambition or attention, the need for that, for it to be, you know, really the top of your field and be seen and respected for that. Could be fear, you know, we just like take this job because we're too scared to do what we really want to do. And there's a voice in our head saying, no, you must do this to, you know, support your family, to be a responsible citizen. You know, certainly don't be an artist or a musician or, you know, dancer or something that maybe is your heart's desire. It could be anger, you know, and some of that may be justified. Maybe people go into social justice law or working in underserved communities. Could be one of the motivations that may have a tinge of anger, like wanting to right the injustice. Or maybe we take a job to piss off our parents. There's also a thread of ignorance in there. I don't think I'm actually speaking to the choir in this room, but people who just have their path set out for them and, you know, school, grad school, job, particular job, and then climb the ladder. And that could be just not taking the time to examine what's really going on with what we're doing, you know? There could be some really wonky things going on in that law firm or in that doctor's office. You know, it's interesting. I made a note here about my mom's journey. She found early on, she was of the generation that, you know, my dad had a big career, like big and flashing lights kind of career. And my mom, who is really smart and ambitious, didn't do very well at being a mom and wasn't the kind of wife my dad was really looking for. So when we were old enough, she went back to college and she got her first degree in American history. And while she was working in that field, she discovered how little information there was about women. And she and a friend of hers, colleague, started the women's history department at UCLA. So, you know, she was motivated by other people's ignorance and by the desire to have equal opportunities and an accurate view of history, like what happened. And if she had been a woman of color, she might have looked at, like, what is the real history? there's a historian named Howard Zinn who wrote an incredible book. I see lots of heads nodding, kind of giving a much more comprehensive, accurate view of history. So, yeah, I'm really proud of what she did, not so much as a parent, but I am of what she did. And then she went on to do some other really great things. So one source I was looking at was Joseph Goldstein's book called Mindfulness. And there's a passage that really struck me as very interesting. It has to do with non-action, like being wise about what we don't participate in, or are we even conscious of it? So he says, it's also helpful to investigate what keeps us complacent about the choices we make. Some time ago, I was asked to contribute an article to a book about global warming. Although I was aware of the magnitude of the problem, I hadn't really spent much time reflecting about it or seriously considering what actions I might take. What then piqued my interest was why I hadn't spent time considering one of the major problems facing our planet. That's an interesting question. It's certainly one I've asked myself. As I reflected on this question, one particular teaching began to shed some light on this pattern of inaction. This teaching can be a light that illuminates many other important issues in our lives as well. The great 12th century Korean Zen master, Chinul, framed this teaching in terms of what he called sudden awakening, gradual cultivation. And this is a quote from Chinul. Although he has awakened to the fact that his original nature is no different from that of the Buddha, beginningless habit energies are extremely difficult to remove suddenly. Anyone relate to that? Hindrances are formidable and habits are deeply ingrained. That's certainly been my experience. So how could you neglect gradual cultivation simply because of one moment of awakening? After awakening, you must be constantly on your guard. If deluded thoughts suddenly appear, do not follow after them. Then and only then will your practice reach completion. So he goes on to say that we all have moments where we wake up to the fact of global warming, of racism, of sexism, of suppression or oppression of any kind. But then they pass. You know, we have such a life of distraction and multi ways of gaining information. It's a distracted time in human history, I think. Anyone feel that way? You know, especially I think people maybe a little younger than most of us here. But still, it's contagious, right? You know, I just recently discovered Instagram. And I only opened it because the person who sent me something is someone very dear to me, and she's having this grand adventure right now. But then, you know, oh my God, they're saving a baby elephant. Oh my God, the bear is friends with the German Shepherd. You know, just, Hugh and I looked at each other because neither of us are on social media going, oh, now I get the scrolling thing. So being aware of it, then we were able to stop for now. So it is easy to, you know, have this great awakening to the reality of things, not just the bad things, but the good things that we want to cultivate. And we have this moment, and then it passes by. Does anyone relate to that? Just raise your hand or not. Yeah? Okay, cool. So that's, I think, pretty much it from Joseph. Yeah. Okay, cool. So as lay people, I mean, maybe some of you are ordained in something. I don't want to presume that. We may occupy more time, work may occupy more time than almost anything else in our lives. And so that means it's really essential not to hold it separately, because it actually does make up a big part of our lives. And even if you're retired, it's still like there's a lot of time to look at of how you want to fill that. And not just how, but with what intention, with what wise intention, wise actions, wise speech can be used in any type of life that you're having. So if we look at it from this more subtle, integrated level, we can ask what we do by bringing awareness to the state of mind that we're in and the state of heart that we're in as we're working. How are we thinking about people, about our coworkers, about them? You know, the majority of my career, which transitioned into mindfulness, teaching mindfulness all over the world, was as a physician assistant in primary care. And I started in the basement of LA County Women's Hospital, working with almost exclusively Latina women. And then I moved out here and worked in a lot of private practices. And so on one level, you could say that that's a good livelihood, helping people who are sick, you know, trying to keep up to date on the latest research and treatments, and you know, bringing kindness if you can. So what I experienced as I started really young. I graduated when I was 24. Huey, can you turn that down a little bit, please? Thank you.
Hang on. Do you want what turned down?
Oh, the cool air coming in. It's a little powerful up here. Thanks. So I don't care if whether you guys are comfortable. I do. But what I discovered, especially as time went on, because I started as a PA in 1982. 1982, something like, yeah. So I was young and pretty naive. I grew up in a house of, you know, educators, historians, and artists. And so science wasn't even on the table. Maybe I took that job to piss them off. I don't know. No, I went into the sciences because I wanted to touch something that felt more real than what I'd grown up with. Even though I love the arts, and deep in my heart, I would have done something in the arts. So as I started to go on in practicing medicine, I became more and more aware of how much harm is involved in allopathic medicine, and that it's a really tricky balance, and it's informed by a lot of things. You know, I was young and impressionable, and I didn't really think twice about letting the drug reps teach me about their latest drug. And actually, usually I did learn something, but then also I was being influenced, right? And I'm a little ashamed to say I accepted their fancy dinner invitations and weekend at the spa, and you know, in retrospect, that wasn't wise livelihood. That wasn't bringing wisdom. That was just plain old greed, basically. And you know, I can own that. I have that. And some of those things were enjoyable or helpful, but you know, you got to take a stand somewhere against that. And then when medications started being advertised so widely in television, I found I called it, my medical practice changed to what I called the menu, ordering from the menu. So people come with a list. You know, I think I have psoriasis, can I try Xylumpia? And it's a wonderful name Hugh made up for drugs. And this is where, being part of an HMO or managed care, I could say, well, we can't do that because it's not covered by your insurance at this time. There's no generic, so I think we should explore some other options than, $500 a month for Xylumpia. But there are just so many factors. The hospital making money, the radiologist's center, is this really, this study really need a recall, or is that to make them more money? And, unfortunately, those are things that we have to face. So it became more and more conflicted for me. And there were drugs I prescribed that were super popular that later were taken off the market because they were damaging hearts. There was one particularly popular arthritis medicine, and that was pulled off the market very shortly. But, I had prescribed quite a bit of it by then, by the time they found out about the cardiac side effects. And then there's also taking into account the person that you're working with, what will serve them. And so I actually dug out my book because I wrote a section on wise livelihood, and with your permission or without it, I'll just read you. This is about 10 years. I wrote this about 10 years ago. Oh, lucky for you. I do have my bookmark. Okay. So I was recalling a patient who worked as a waitress in a casino. She was on her feet all day. She was a little heavy set, and her knees really bothered her. And, the options of saying, well, if you can reduce your weight, you can go to physical therapy, you can take these supplements, go on an anti-inflammatory diet, all that. So, she wasn't going to do that. She had kids to raise. She had a 3-ring circus going on in her life. So to give her some temporary relief, I gave her a steroid shot in her knees. So that made it possible for her to function. And at the same time, it's not so great for the joint over the long haul. Short term, it's okay. And so it's one of those things okay, I can only give her this every 4 months. It's not sustainable, but, I just have to do what I'm doing right now and hope for the best, and encourage her. And then she was sharing with me about wise livelihood of working in a casino. And she would say, oh, I see the same men come in, they lose so much money, it just breaks my heart. And so she's a real sensitive soul. So we're both grappling with these issues. It's not black and white, it's not all or nothing. So, but it's the examination of it that I think is really important. At this point, I want to just pause for a minute and see if there's, and this includes our Zoom family, just to see anything that's arising for you as we explore this. One thing that I did that is actually something that is recommended, according to Joseph Goldstein, that the Buddha held dearly, is how can I do this job with more generosity and loving kindness in my heart? Because it's easy to get annoyed with people who, come back month after month, no change, same problems, and to start othering, how could you be so, well, I don't want to use the word stupid, so pretend I used another word. No, it's really coming out of, I want you to take better care of yourself so you won't suffer. And, I was young and kind of cocky, and, I was very fit. I was, appropriate weight. I was athletic. and I was pretty disciplined about things, but I had the luxury of that. I wasn't raising a family. I had a very low-key lifestyle, didn't require lots of money or things, and of course, so I had time and the privilege to do that. But I was, in my own little snotty way, I was judging people, but it was really out of a place of, I really want to help them not suffer. Mm-hmm. And so I developed burnout quite quickly, and that is a good sign that you're not doing wise livelihood if you burn out. And that means just overwhelmed. I would become somewhat indifferent and shut down to the suffering because I was in overwhelm. They might call it empathy fatigue. And so I was able to turn that around because of my practice. I sat for a long time where Jokai is from. We known each other many, many years up at Yokoji Zen Mountain Center. And with other teachers as well. I learned how to start focusing on my breath. I'd feel that stress arising. It's like, I have 15 minutes to see you. Tell me about your headaches. They have a long list of many things, so let's just start with that. And then their answer is, well, in 1952, and you're like, oh, God. And I know how many patients I have on my list. So it's like, oh, God, how are we going to rustle this along? And I finally just came to the conclusion that my most important job was to love people, to just love them and accept them unconditionally. And that became much more easy and satisfying way to function at my job. And I would literally, if I started feeling that, I'd just start wishing them well, silently, and breathing out compassion for them and breathing in compassion for me. So the whole circle of compassion would be in the room. It still left me with a truckload of ethical things to deal with, like big pharma, like the way the hospital makes money, et cetera, et cetera. But at least my behavior became more in alignment with my spiritual life, in which my true desire, which was to help people. And, I'd write things on my prescription pad, like a very depressed older woman. I asked her, like, what do you really enjoy? And she really enjoys kids' animated movies. So I just write on the prescription, go see, and if I knew the latest one, go see Frozen by yourself, get popcorn, and that was my, or don't talk to your mother for a week. I think your depression will clear right up. So, you have to get creative in what you do, but it has to start with really examining what we're doing, how we're doing it, is it in alignment? So even if I maybe didn't end up with my dream job and I ended up as a PA, I was good at it. It served me well, and eventually when I was trained in a program called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, which is started by John Kabat-Zinn, which brings meditation specifically into medicine, meditation and yoga, like two of my big practices, and taking the robes, the bells, the incense, the chants, everything out of it, and making it more like health science, neuroscience, physiology, and then cultivating these factors of the heart. And so it was a really good fit for me. And it took a while before I was doing enough to support myself. But it was much more in alignment. But guess what? There's unethical people in the mindfulness community. And when I started doing research, which I really enjoy, I met some really unethical researchers who were just grasping for money just check in with where I am. So any thoughts about your own journey in your work or in Wise Livelihood, or what that means to you? So these are some of the things that I applied. So while I'm grappling with these complex issues, I actively use what I've learned from mindfulness-based stress reduction in my Buddhist practice. I use the awareness of breath and of the body to help clarify my decision making. So how does this feel in my body if I take this action? For example, when I'm stressed, I focus on my breath until the blood flow gets back to my prefrontal cortex. When I'm frustrated, I connect to my heart, to my goodwill intentions. I'm aware of the noble truth of suffering and how I may make it worse by craving for things to be done my way, the right way. I know only too well the pain of allowing my agenda to occlude my vision of the person right in front of me, who deserves my attention right now. I apply wise view, wise intention, wise effort, and wise speech. I practice in this way because I really need it. It's so painful when I get off track, so I try not to go numb or fall asleep. And also practicing in this way helps me be a better healthcare provider and to be more compassionate. And even if I'm unable to get others to lower their blood pressure by meditating, at least I can try it myself. So, like, if one person's going to get out of here doing meditation and yoga, it's probably going to be me. So, let's just sit together for a moment and sort of take in what we've heard and thought and felt. Nice deep breaths. Just giving the mind a chance to settle. Dropping as fully as possible into the body. So I'd like you to just take a moment to appreciate yourself for choosing to spend your time in this particular way. Sitting together and talking together and learning together on how to be good citizens in the world and good to ourselves, honoring ourselves and those instincts. And we really appreciate you showing up. It means so much to be together in community. Especially, it's scary times, and when we're together, it just feels a lot better. When speaking of which, one of the other things that can be helpful examining some of these complex issues, the Buddha said to surround yourself with wise people. Mm-hmm. And he also said don't associate with assholes. I'm pretty sure that's a direct translation. It does help to have wise people around you that, maybe you could have said to a mentor or teacher, I just have a gut feeling that this isn't right, So I think we can stay on track better with our ethics, our values, when we're together. There's that great misunderstanding of Darwin's teachings that, at least in the West, we took away survival of the fittest. And if you look deeply at his work, it's survival of the most cooperative. And so let's be our cooperative community, supporting each other. And I believe Amy has a few announcements for us. And thank you to the volunteers. You're such an important part of making this happen, including you, my friend. So we like to close these sessions with a dedication of merit that our friend Ian Chalice wrote about how we can take the goodness of our efforts and our hearts and radiate it out to touch all beings. So if you have a copy, it says "Going Forth." You can say it along with me. Going forth into this world, so in need of light, may I bring all the kindness and wisdom I embody to each being and each situation that I meet. May the power of my practice today strengthen my resolve to be an agent of peace and justice in this world. Going forth together into this world, so in need of light, may we together bring all the kindness and wisdom we embody to each being and each situation that we meet. May the power of our practice today strengthen our resolve to be agents of peace and justice in this world. We dedicate our practice to the liberation of all beings, the great, the small, the wise, the ignorant, the powerful, and the powerless. May all beings be liberated from sorrow and loss, hatred and injustice, scarcity and want, and every form of suffering. May our practice today be a prayer for peace, and may it benefit all beings without exception. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, Zoom family. Thanks for showing up.